No state was ever greater, none more righteous or richer in good example. Of late, riches have brought in avarice and excessive pleasures. This was Livy writing in 27 BC, right after Augustus had taken power. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? In this passage, Livy is mourning a golden age slipping away. But interestingly to me, 27 BC actually marked a time where Rome had finally been united, and actually was at its largest territorial extent in its history up to that point. However, the man that commissioned him to write these things, Augustus, had a very good reason for wanting people to think this. Being remembered as Rome's first emperor, Augustus hadn't just fallen into that position. He had won it over a decade-long brutal civil war. Upon finally defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra, he was faced with a very real problem, and it was that for centuries Romans had vehemently opposed one man ruling all. Just 13 years earlier, in 44 BC, his great uncle Julius Caesar had tried the same thing and was assassinated by his fellow senators for it. But Augustus was not his uncle, and instead of assuming the obvious role of king, he demonstrated the political genius that would define his reign by creating the princeps, which in Latin literally means first citizen. On paper, he also handed back the supreme power that he had taken from the Senate and the people. He called the whole arrangement res publica restuta, the republic restored. I don't really know Latin. In practice, Augustus actually did control, most of the army, the treasury, and most of the provinces personally. The Senate still technically existed, but the man who controlled the legions wasn't going anywhere based on a vote. With the rest of the Senate at least cowed by these pleasantries, Augustus still needed a way to supplicate the people of Rome into believing this story he's telling about restoration. His first move was to commission the poet Virgil to write an epic about Rome called the Aeneid. Virgil gave Aeneas a son named Lullus, the exact name the Julian family had already claimed as their ancestor. Augustus wasn't just linking Rome with Troy, he was linking his own family tree with an actual goddess. This isn't just some poetry Augustus commissioned. The Aeneid is going to be one of the most influential works ever created in Latin, and is actually going to form the base for what the founding story of Rome is today. Around 18 BC, Augustus took another step by passing a set of laws that rewarded marriage and having children, while penalizing adultery, making it literally a criminal offense, whereas before it was just a private matter. And by doing so, he tried to legally enforce this return to old Roman virtue. In a series of events that echo similarities to the current double-sided morality being perpetuated in America, Augustus's only biological child, Julie, was exiled in 2 BC. After it was discovered she had been having many affairs with prominent men in Rome, including the son of Augustus's arch-rival Mark Antony. Mark Antony's son was sentenced to death, and Augustus sent his only biological child into a particularly gruesome exile, being sent to the smallest island possible, literally just a small rock outcrop. As a form of protest, her mother followed his daughter into exile, and only after years on the brink of starvation, Augustus agreed to let his daughter live out the rest of her exile on the mainland. This story may or may not lead you to be even more shocked when you hear about Augustus's own personal life. According to the historian Suetonius, even Augustus's own friends couldn't deny he was a serial adulterer. Their defense wasn't that it didn't happen, but it was that he was doing it for, political reasons and was trying to gain intelligence on his enemy. Whatever you say, bro. Mark Antony, during their public feud, accused Augustus of something almost cartoonishly bold, pulling a former consul's wife out of a dinner party, taking her aside in front of her own husband, and bringing her back to the dinner table in front of everybody, visibly red in the face with her hair messed up. Amazingly, a letter has actually survived between Mark Antony and Augustus. This letter came at a time when Augustus was kind of making fun of Mark Antony for lying with someone that wasn't a Roman in Cleopatra, and this was Mark Antony's response. "What has made such change in you? Because I lie with the queen? She is my wife. Am I just beginning this, or was it 9 years ago? What then of you? Do you lie only with Drusilla?" Which is Augustus's actual wife. "Good luck to you if when you read this letter you have not been with Tertulla, or Terentilla, or Rufilla, or Salvia, Titicinia, or all of them." That boy had a roster. Sheesh. The war on adultery is only half the story, however. What Augustus and his fellow aristocrats really thought was leading to this was luxury and the influence of this Greek hedonistic lifestyle. They attributed it to a sense of idleness and the Romans' moral corruption and even more declining birth rates. In 18 BC, Augustus passed the Lex Lulia Sumputuria. This one specifically capped how much money people could spend on banquets and feasts. Around 200 sesterces on ordinary days, 300 on festival days, and up to 1,000 on wedding feasts. It also banned certain exotic foods outright, like imported foreign birds, as a way of stopping displays of wealth. Augustus himself wore simple clothes. Because he and his contemporaries didn't think luxury was tacky, they thought it was an actual threat to their civilization. This wasn't a new concept Augustus was tapping into either. Rome had passed the Lex Oppia during the Second Punic War, restricting women's possessions. Augustus's laws were reviving and formalizing a genuine centuries-old fear that wealth would destroy Roman virtue. Combined with the actual laws being passed here, there was a campaign to create an archetype to describe the ideal citizen. The core virtues being sold were these: virtus, a kind of tough, active excellence; courage plus competence, not just bravery; and pietas, a dutifulness to the gods, to the state, and to your family. The Romans themselves pointed to a man named Cincinnatus, who was called off his farm to become dictator and save Rome, and after saving it, he actually gave up ultimate power and went back to the farm. Women had their own archetype. The virtue here was chastity and domesticity, specifically being a one-man woman, meaning being with one man for her whole life. Modest and skilled at traditionally women work, above all, spinning and weaving wool at home. So here's the pattern we just watched. A golden age gets invented, a specific archetype of virtue is attributed to each gender, and the elites enforcing the standard don't abide by it themselves. And if that sounds familiar, it's because that same exact process is still going on. We just move the golden age forward roughly 2,000 years to 1955. Similar to the role Virgil played in Rome, being commissioned to create kind of the initial building blocks of what the social engineering was going to be, historian Elizabeth Cohen has described the rise of what she calls the Consumer's Republic, a period where the government and industry deliberately framed consumption as a public service and a virtue, and in and of itself a patriotic act, buying and homeownership as literal contributions to national strength. The nuclear family, married once for life, breadwinner father, mother at home, wasn't just private preference, it was treated as the moral backbone of the country. A stable home was presented as the foundation for a stable America. Divorce carried a real social stigma. Sexual restraint, both before and within marriage, was treated as a public good, not just a private choice. And this moral framing had a political edge too, because this was at the height of the Cold War, and personal virtue got tied explicitly to national virtue. A disciplined, faithful, God-fearing household was framed as what made America different from the Soviet Union and from the rest of the world. Moral conduct wasn't just ethics, it was patriotism. Similar to Augustus, many of our supreme leaders, i.e. the president, seem to have little regard for the social engineering that they're trying to put into place. You know, FDR, JFK, and most egregiously Bill Clinton have all been very publicly unfaithful. Not to mention the big man in there himself right now has got quite a few scandals, actually probably more than any of the presidents before this. Famously, I mean, before he even took office, paying off Stormy Daniels, who was a porn star that he cheated on his wife with. In America, I think one of the key components is the boomer generation. Being the largest ever American generation, and by far the most financially and politically influential, their romanticized version of the past is always on display. Whether it's the boomers we know in real life, who are prone to glorifying the past and kind of coming at the newer generations for being on their screens too much, which I actually find very ironic because the boomers were the ones that really made the TV go widespread. And most of the boomers I know are painfully addicted to TV and have probably watched cable every single day for decades. And outside of the TV, I see boomers on their phones quite a bit, and they normally are actually even worse with the social cues with it, in my opinion. But that's not the topic of the video. But if you want to hear more about that, you should watch this video. Or the ones at the top, attempting to socially engineer the younger generations to have more affinity for the state. We're constantly having this romanticized past shoved in our face. I often wonder if it's always like that. And, you know, right now the boomers just happen to be that huge influential group. But, you know, if every generation has that, if the boomers, the generation that was in their position when they were kids, was doing the same thing and saying, oh, you should have been there when we were all on horses and carriages like these cars. I hate them. You know, these TVs, y'all should have heard the radio, man. The radio was way better. Or perhaps we truly do live in a unique time that happens to share a lot of direct parallels to this specific huge transformation time within the Roman Republic. Because Augustus taking power was actually a huge change for the Romans. The Romans had been a republic for, 400 or 500 years, and then they flipped to one man ruling everything, which, we happen to be in a republic right now. And we happen to be at like a culturally and societal pivotal time. These next decade or two, whether or not AI continues to grow and displace a lot of the workforce. Politically, we're much more divided and radicalized in some ways. And, we're getting further and further apart from where we could find a middle ground and continue the system as it's currently created. And another thing that's interesting is it takes a lot of control to actually do the social engineering. The Romans, they weren't as able to influence their whole population until Augustus had kind of, controlled everything. And it no longer was like these factions coming at each other. It was more, he came up with an idea and that was what they were going to do. Even if other people agreed with it, I'm just saying there was no discourse on it. And Augustus, being an ancient human, had very little control relatively when compared to what the American elite have now and the possibilities of social engineering at their fingertips. So that was a concept I hope you found interesting. I think regardless, my takeaway would be, be your own person. That it's really that simple. It's pretty easy in the modern day, in my opinion, to avoid social engineering because you can see every different side of every argument. You can see, if you saw a romanticized version of something, you could do research within the hour and find out whether or not things were actually better at that moment in time. But regardless, have a great day.